We welcome you to another Sunday School lesson. Sunday School is a gift from God. In this week's lesson, we take a look specifically at the creation of the lights in the sky, and the animals that inhabit the earth, and the marine life in the sea. God was fully in control of every little detail as He prepared the world for us to live in. The book of Genesis says nothing about its author, but the early church, as well as the Talmud, and the first-century Jewish historian Josephus, held the conviction that Moses wrote the book. Both the Old and New Testaments contain testimonies that Moses wrote the entire Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Bible. He was a man who was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, Acts 7:22. Moses had the unusual privilege of spending many uninterrupted hours of talking with God on Mount Sinai, so I don't know if there was anyone who was better qualified than Moses, to write the history we have in the book of Genesis. Moses may have written the book during the years of the wilderness wanderings, to prepare the new generation to enter the land of Canaan. Moses did not write to people who were isolated from the other religious views of their day. Israel had been in captivity for 400 years in Egypt, where the sun and a mixture of other gods were worshipped. The Canaanites worshipped fertility gods, warrior gods, gods who guaranteed healthy crops, gods of the moon and stars. They offered food and at times, even their own children to their gods, to appease them. Against this backdrop of false religions, we see that the creation account of Genesis refutes many errors of false religion. This week's lesson is a continuation of last week's lesson. We ended that lesson with Genesis 1:13, when God completed 3 days of His creation. Our first verse says, "And God said, Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times, and days and years." Across the sky, God placed the heavenly bodies or lights and assigned them their work, which was first to divide the day from the night. These lights were also to be for signs, to mark off seasons, and for days, and years. The fact that the lights were also intended for signs does not mean that they were to be used for astrology or fortune-telling, because God later condemned those practices, Isaiah 47:12-14. Time was designed by God for mankind, and the creation of the lights to divide the day from the night was the first step in this direction. Day and night had existed since the first day, Genesis 1:5, but from now on, these lights were appointed to regulate the cycle of day and night. It was God, our Creator, who gave man the idea for the first calendar. Verse 15 says, "And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. The lights that God placed in the sky do give light upon the earth, so that we may walk, and work, as every day requires. The lights of heaven do not shine for themselves, nor for the world of angels above who don't need them, but God made them to shine for us, for our pleasure and advantage. The lights of heaven are made to serve us, and they do it faithfully, and shine when they are supposed to without fail. We who are saved are also set as lights in this world to serve God, Matthew 5:14-16, but unfortunately we are failing miserably, because our lights do not shine before men, as God's lights shine before us. Verse 16 says, "God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars." The lights of heaven are the sun, moon, and stars. The sun is the greatest light of all, more than 1,000,000 times greater than the earth, and the most glorious and useful of all the lights of heaven. God, in His wisdom, power, and goodness, made the sun an invaluable blessing to the creatures on earth. The moon is called a lesser light. But here it is referred to as one of the 2 great lights, probably by virtue of its function, as ruler of the night, and in respect of its usefulness to the earth, it is more excellent than the stars. It's interesting that here the lesser light, the moon, is said to rule the night, but Psalms 136:9, says that the moon and stars share in providing light at night. There is a lesson in this for believers. For the believer, the best and most honorable way of ruling, is by giving light and doing good. Those who command respect are the ones who live a useful life, and so shine as lights. Verse 17 says, God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. In Genesis 1:14-15, God gave a command concerning the sun and the moon, saying, Let there be lights in the vault of the sky. But in Genesis 1:3, God had also said, Let there be light, and there was light. But at that time this was a chaos of light, scattered and confused. Now the light was made into several luminaries, more glorious and more serviceable than just the light of Genesis 1:3. As the Father of lights, God is the God of order, and not of confusion. So God set those lights in the sky to be seen by all. Both day and night, along with the seasons, are necessary for the benefit of man, animals, and plants. If Earth was not in its precise location, revolving around the sun and rotating on its axis, life could not be sustained. If the world were just a little closer to the sun, we would burn up, and if it was a little farther, we would freeze. Could all this have occurred by accident? Of course not. The precision with which the world and the universe operate is more evidence for believing in a divine creator. Verse 18 says, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. To emphasize the work that God made the sun and the moon to perform, Moses summarized what he wrote in verses 14-18. But unlike in those verses, here Moses added the words, and God saw that it was good. The Creator once again stood back looking at the lights he had created to rule over the day and night for man's good, and he saw that it was good. Since God is inherently good, whatever he creates is also good. Verse 19 says, And there was evening, and there was morning the fourth day. Having now prepared the earth for habitation in 4 days, Moses, using Jewish reckoning of time, wrote, And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. Unlike how we reckon time beginning with the morning, the Jews began their day with the evening at 6 p.m. continuing to 6 a.m. Verse 20 says, And God said, Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. After God completed his work on the fourth day, the next day he created marine life and birds of the air. We should not understand this declaration by God as if the waters had any productive power of their own. God was saying, Let them be brought into being, the fish in the waters and the fowl out of the waters. So it was on the fifth day, verse 23, that the fish and fowl were created, and both were created out of the waters. Although fish have one kind of flesh, and birds have another kind, they were made together, and both came out of the waters. The moving creature that hath life refers to all types of fish, and the fowl or birds were created out of the waters to fly above the earth in the sky. Verse 21 says, So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. After giving the command in the previous verse, God himself executed it and created great whales, and every living creature that moves, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind. God abundantly created every living creature that moves or swims in the waters. The phrase after their kind used after the creation of both marine life and fowls refers to the many different species of fish and birds. The words every winged fowl not only include birds, but also insects. Again, God looked at what he had created and saw that it was good. Verse 22 says, God blessed them and said, Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. After declaring his creation of both marine life and winged fowl, Moses wrote that God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful, and multiply. God's blessing would enable them to reproduce after their own kind, by filling the waters in the seas and the fowl in the air. God will bless his own works, and not forsake them, and whatsoever God does shall be forever. Ecclesiastes 3:14. The power of God's providence preserves all things. Fruitfulness is the effect of God's blessing, and the multiplying of the fish and fowl from year to year is still the fruit of his blessing. We should give God glory for the continuance of these creatures to this day for the benefit of man. Job 12:7-9. Verse 23 says, "And there was evening, and there was morning the fifth day." After God created the fish of the seas and the winged fowl of the air, Moses wrote, "And the evening and the morning were the fifth day," indicating what God created on the fifth day. Verse 24 says, "And God said, Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. The day before, the seas were filled with fish, and the air with fowl. Now the beasts of the earth, the cattle, and the creeping things that live on the earth were made. As he had done before, the Lord spoke and said, "Let these creatures now come into being upon the earth." God made them all after his kind, not only of different shapes, but of different natures, some to be tame around a house, others to be wild in the fields, some feeding on grass and herbs, others upon flesh, some harmless, and others ravenous. The phrase beast of the earth includes those kinds of creatures that we refer to as wild animals. The term cattle refers to domesticated beasts, farm animals, or livestock. The creeping thing most likely includes other creatures that move low to the ground like snakes. The animals were composed of the same elements as the earth, since this verse says that they came from the earth. Their bodies, like human bodies, go back to dust after death. Along with fish and bird life, these animals have instincts. But since they were not made in the image of God like mankind, they don't have eternal spirits. Our final verse says God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. After giving the command for animal life to appear on earth in the previous verse, here God executed that command and made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creep upon the earth after his kind. As previously noted in verse 24, beast of the earth refers to wild animals, cattle refers to domesticated animals, and the creeping thing refers to creatures that move low to the ground like snakes. God created all of these animals, some to serve man, but not for man's food like the horse. God created other animals for man's food, but not for his service, like sheep. He also created some animals for both food and service like the ox. But some were created neither for food or service like the wild beasts. In all of this, we can see the infinite wisdom of the Creator. Key verse, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times, and days and years." Genesis 1:16. This week, we saw how God had us in mind when He created this beautiful world for us to live in. He gave us both light and life to make our lives meaningful. God wants us to know Him as we look at the creation He made just for us. This world didn't come to be by chance as some would have us believe. It is fascinating that God would record all this for us, so that we can learn about the beginnings of our world, and that it all started with Him. The world around us should be a reminder that our Creator cares for us deeply, and that we should praise His mighty name. The things we are to hold fast on from Genesis 1 include the following. 1. Everything that God made was in preparation for man, verses 14 to 15. 2. Only the infinitely wise God knows the best place for all His creation, verses 16 to 19. 3. Because God is good, everything He created was also good, verses 20 to 21. 4. Without God's blessing, nothing and no one can flourish, verses 22 to 23. 5. Only the all-powerful God can create things that can reproduce its own kind, verses 24 to 25. Thought to remember. If creation is not an endless wonder to you, you're not paying attention. Scientific matters sometimes obscure our thinking that we could not approach Genesis as Moses intended, without first showing why evolution is so erroneous. Genesis point us to the Creator, who alone is worthy of our worship, enjoyment, and obedience. Let us know God, who is Himself invisible, through His works. Our lesson next week is entitled God Creates People. Our biblical reference is Genesis 1:26-31. We are truly glad you spent time to learn this week's lesson with us. We hope you are blessed and may share these with somebody else. We wish you can join us at the Cubao Church of Christ soon. Our congregation is a place to discover faith, find new friends, grow closer relationship with Christ and serve with each other's gifts. Thank you very much, have a great week, and God bless you always, dear brothers and sisters.